I remember the hallway lights, how they flickered just slightly when the building's HVAC kicked in. I remember the smell of paper, toner, burnt coffee, and something else, a kind of presence. You don't notice it at first, not when you belong. But that morning, I did. I noticed everything. The silence of greetings withheld, the thin layer of dust on my office nameplate, the way someone closed a door a little too quickly when I passed. You can't fake comfort, and that morning, mine had vanished. I had spent 11 years in that building, not just working, but creating. I had built the marketing team from nothing, sitting on folding chairs in a temporary room when we first pitched our name to investors. I stayed late, skipped vacations, carried us through product launches that should have buried us. I mentored new hires like they were my own. And when the founder, Edward Lorne, smiled and called me his right hand, I believed him, not just because I wanted to, but because I had earned it. Or so I thought. His son, Julian, arrived just after Edward's second heart surgery. Sharp suit, colder eyes. A management consultant by title, a legacy by blood. I told myself to give him the benefit of the doubt. He was young, yes, but ambitious. Maybe he'd learn to listen. Maybe he'd learn to lead. But what I saw instead was a boy playing chess with people's lives, too impatient to understand the game. Still, I adapted. I coached the team to speak his language. I softened his blunt orders into strategic plans. I tried to protect the culture Edward had built, not out of sentimentality, but because it worked, and because we were on the verge of something big. A deal we had nurtured for nearly 2 years, expansion into the European market with a partner that would triple our reach. I'd flown out 3 times already, to Paris, then Zurich. I knew the intricacies, the personalities, the hidden red tape. I didn't just contribute to the deal, I was the deal. So when the meeting came, the one I was told to attend alone, last minute, in a room I had never used, I already felt the unease threading through my veins. The HR director was there. Julian was not. She didn't meet my eyes when she read from her script. Your position has been dissolved effective immediately. No offer, no cause. Just a white envelope and the sound of my own pulse in my ears. I didn't speak. I didn't argue. I nodded, took the envelope, and walked out the same doors I had once held open for so many others. Outside, the sky was a dull gray. I remember thinking how utterly ordinary everything looked. I sat in my car, the silence thick, my hands gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing still real. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't broken, but because something colder was waking up inside me. The next few days blurred. I answered no calls. I stayed off email. I watched as the news began to trickle through the industry. So-and-so had assumed new responsibilities. The European deal was entering final discussions. I waited for someone to call. No one did. Not even Edward. Until the 5th night. My phone lit up just past 10. His name still saved in my contacts, though I had considered deleting it. I answered, and for a moment he didn't speak. Then, in that slow, gravel voice I knew too well, he asked me why I hadn't shown up to the Zurich summit. I told him, quietly, plainly, and I heard him exhale like a man who had been hit in the stomach. I wasn't told, he said. I didn't know. His silence after that was longer than any apology could have been. He asked to meet, not at the office, at a park near his home where he walked his dog each morning. I agreed. When I arrived, he was already seated, coat buttoned, coffee in hand. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. I made mistakes, he said. I thought Julian needed space to lead. I didn't realize He stopped, then started again. The deal is falling apart without you. That was when I felt it. Not triumph, not revenge, just clarity. A sense that the truth had surfaced, and now it was up to me what came next. I laid out my terms, not with bitterness, but with precision. Full autonomy over the European division. Authority to hire, fire, and report directly to the board. and protections, legal ones, to ensure this would never happen again. Edward agreed without hesitation, because he understood, finally, what Julian never could, that leadership isn't inherited, it's earned, one sacrifice at a time. Picking up from the moment Edward nodded in agreement, I didn't feel vindicated. Not then. I felt emptied, like I had finally put down a weight I'd carried so long, I'd forgotten it was there. I left the park without another word, the cold wind curling around my coat like a warning. This wasn't over. This was just the quiet before the storm. Returning to the office was clinical. The building hadn't changed, but I had. The receptionist didn't know where to place her eyes when I walked in. A few people glanced up from their desks, startled, unsure. And yet, no one asked. No one welcomed. Silence is a mirror. Sometimes it reflects your power. Sometimes your exile. I met with legal first, quietly, thoroughly. Edward made good on his word. Paperwork signed, protections filed. I was back, but not as the woman who left. I had a new title, a new team, and a new understanding of exactly how much had been taken and by whom. Julian didn't come to my reintroduction meeting. He wasn't on the calendar, no message, just his empty corner office with the blinds shut tight. Cowards don't announce themselves. They hide in shadows and pull strings, thinking no one sees their hands. But I did. I'd seen them for months. At first, I observed, not to forgive, but to understand. Where had the cracks begun? How had the company, once built on trust and collaboration, become a place of whispers and second guesses? The answer came slowly. Patterns, quiet shifts, departmental budgets frozen without explanation, emails that mysteriously never arrived, performance reviews rewritten after submission. It was surgical, subtle, designed not to collapse the house, but to gut its foundation one beam at a time. I kept my distance, no confrontations, no accusations. I met with my direct reports, established new protocols, and built a firewall around my division. I made it clear, transparency wasn't optional. Every file documented, every directive copied. I didn't shout, I didn't threaten, I didn't need to. Then came the missteps, small at first, a misrouted client invoice, a system permissions error, meeting minutes mysteriously altered between recording and distribution. I asked questions, not of Julian, but of the people closest to him. I watched how they shifted in their seats, how their eyes flickered when I mentioned dates, discrepancies, names. I knew something was off, but I needed proof. I hired an external IT audit firm, discreet, independent, ironclad. They combed through logs, version histories, access trails. What they found didn't just confirm my suspicions, it exposed the entire network of interference. Julian had orchestrated a quiet coup, leveraging select staff to manipulate systems, reroute communications, and undermine key projects that weren't under his control, including mine. I took the findings to Edward, not with glee, not even with anger, just fact, evidence, time-stamped, signed, undeniable. He read it slowly, twice. Then he looked at me, eyes darker than I'd ever seen them. "How far does this go?" he asked. "Far enough," I said, "but not beyond repair, not yet." He called a board meeting that night, not for consensus, but for confrontation. Julian was summoned, and this time he came. I watched from my seat as he entered, confident, rehearsed, until Edward slid the folder across the table, until the first page turned, until the silence became suffocating. He tried denial first, then deflection, then silence. But it was too late. The audit was complete, the evidence exhaustive, the damage irreversible. One by one, the board members shifted, not in anger, in clarity. They saw now what they hadn't before, not just what Julian had done, but what he lacked: accountability, integrity, leadership. He was removed by unanimous vote. No press release, no ceremony, just a closed-door decision and a walk out the back elevator. I didn't speak to him, not then. I didn't need to. Consequences have their own language. In the days that followed, I was offered full oversight, not just of the European expansion, but of company-wide operations. A new role, a clean mandate, not because I asked for it, but because I had earned it, not through ambition, but through endurance, through silence that watched, through precision that cut deeper than rage ever could. I didn't celebrate. That kind of victory doesn't come with champagne. It comes with a different kind of quiet. Not the silence of dismissal or exile, but the stillness after a storm, when the walls are soaked and the roof holds just barely. There's no joy in cleaning up after betrayal, only clarity. My first move wasn't to reassert control, it was to rebuild trust. The company was still breathing, but shallow. People were hesitant, watching. Not me, each other. After months under Julian's reign, no one knew where the landmines were buried. No one knew who had been loyal or merely silent. So I started small, weekly roundtables, no agendas, just people talking, listening. I asked questions I already knew the answers to, just to see who would answer honestly. I watched the ones who stayed silent, the ones who waited to see what I'd do. I didn't punish them, I understood them. Fear is a parasite. It makes you still, makes you small. But the ones who had helped Julian, who had rewritten reports, rerouted emails, hidden meetings, they were let go. Quietly, professionally, no theatrics. Just a folder, a conversation, and an exit. I didn't need to humiliate them. Letting them leave with their silence intact was punishment enough. In their place, I brought in people who understood not just strategy, but humility. People who knew how to speak truth, even when it was inconvenient. Not stars, not saviors, just adults. That was the culture I wanted. A place where no one had to guess what room they were allowed to enter. The first few weeks were rough. Processes were broken, teams were burned out. No one wanted to make decisions. They were used to being overwritten, undercut. I didn't push. I let them talk themselves back to confidence. I made mistakes too. I overcorrected, micromanaged, tried to solve everything myself. Old habits, they die louder than they die hard. But slowly, things shifted. People started taking initiative again, speaking up, disagreeing. And not out of defiance, but belief. Belief that it was safe to be smart again, safe to care. I saw it in the way meetings ran longer because no one wanted to leave. I saw it in the way people laughed, deep, real laughter, in the break room. Healing doesn't announce itself. It sneaks in. The European deal, once teetering on collapse, stabilized under our new lead negotiator, a woman I'd once mentored during her internship. She brought the same precision and empathy I'd always valued. Watching her lead was like seeing a younger version of myself, but steadier. She didn't need to prove anything. She just did the work and let it speak. When the deal closed, no one clapped. We just sat in the conference room, tired and proud. I looked around that table, at people who had stayed, who had chosen to rebuild, and I felt something I hadn't in years. Not power, not satisfaction, just peace. Edward stepped down quietly that month. No drama, no announcements, just a handwritten note left on my desk. Thank you for standing upright when we all leaned sideways. That was his way, understated, but not without depth. Julian never reached out. I didn't expect him to. Men like him don't apologize. They rationalize. Last I heard, he was consulting overseas. A new title, a new city, but the same hollow confidence. I don't envy him. That kind of reinvention is a prison of its own. You can only start over so many times before you forget who you were supposed to become. Sometimes I pass my old office, the one I sat in before everything cracked open. It's been repainted, different desk, new photos on the wall, but the light still flickers when the HVAC kicks in. Some things, I guess, never change. And some things, finally, do. It's strange, the moments that stay with you, not the big ones, not the boardroom showdowns or contract signings. It's the soft, peripheral things, the sound of a door clicking shut behind someone who never returned, the echo of your own heels on a hallway that used to feel like home. That's what I remember, the quiet betrayals, the slow corrosion. Because none of this happened overnight. Julian didn't dismantle the company with a single move. He did it the way termites do, quietly beneath the surface, undermining, reframing, making people doubt what they knew to be true. And for a while, I let him. That's the part I still unpack sometimes, alone in my apartment when the world quiets down. Why didn't I act sooner? Why did I tolerate the small slights, the passive-aggressive edits, the slow exclusion from decisions I once led? The answer is simple. I believed I had to. When you've built something, truly built it, with your time, your blood, your belief, you don't walk away just because it changes shape. You stay, you adjust, you endure, because maybe it's just a phase. Maybe the new leadership is still finding its rhythm. Maybe the problem is you. That last one is the most dangerous thought of all. Because once you start believing that, you lose your voice. You start explaining away your own discomfort. You tell yourself to wait, to watch, to keep quiet just a little longer. And by the time you realize how deep the damage runs, you've already been cut out. The thing is, silence has power, but only when it's intentional. Once I understood that, I turned everything Julian had used against me into a weapon of precision. My absence became a presence. My stillness became leverage. Every move I made after that was deliberate, calculated, patient. People think revenge is fire and fury. It's not. It's patience. It's detail. It's letting someone think they've won while you quietly rewrite the ending. When the audit exposed Julian, I didn't gloat. I didn't confront him in the hallway or send one of those smug, veiled emails. I did nothing, because his unraveling didn't require my anger. It only required the truth. The irony is, Julian wasn't stupid. He just assumed everyone else was. He thought manipulation was leadership, that controlling information was the same as shaping a vision. He never understood what made this company work wasn't control. It was trust. Fragile, messy, inconvenient trust. And once that was gone, he had nothing. The aftermath wasn't just about restoring roles or repairing processes. It was about stitching something back together without hiding the scars. That's the difference between recovery and denial. I didn't want to pretend it hadn't happened. I wanted everyone to remember what it cost. So I kept the audit summary accessible. I didn't bury it. I let departments read it. I let them ask questions. I wanted them to see what silence had allowed and what vigilance had restored. Some people left, not many, but a few. They said the place felt different now, heavier, less optimistic. I didn't argue. They weren't wrong, but they were mistaking gravity for gloom. There's a weight that comes with truth. Once you carry it, you stop chasing lightness. You start chasing substance. And that's what we built. The European expansion took off quietly. No splashy press release, just solid partnerships, steady growth, and trust that deepened with every quarter. Our Paris team sent me a handwritten note 6 months in. We feel seen, we feel safe. That was the metric I cared about. Sometimes people ask me what the biggest lesson was. I don't have a clean answer, but if I had to try, I'd say this. Power isn't about position, it's about proximity to truth. And once you stop hiding from the truth, yours, theirs, the company's, things begin to align. Not neatly, not quickly, but fully. That's where I live now, in full view, no shadows, no second guessing, just forward. The office looks different now, but it's not the paint or the updated glass panels that changed it. It's the way people move. There's less hesitation in the hallways, fewer glances over shoulders. Decisions aren't buried in 10 layers of approval just to protect someone's ego. People speak with a kind of casual courage now. It's subtle, but unmistakable. Sometimes I catch the newer hires looking at me with a kind of reverence, as if I carry some secret. I don't. I carry history. And history isn't glamorous. It's weight. It's memory. It's knowing exactly how fast things can rot when no one speaks up. One of the interns asked me recently if I'd always planned to be in leadership. I almost laughed. There was never a plan. I didn't climb a ladder, I built it, rung by rung, while others were still figuring out which direction to face. I took what no one else wanted, the chaotic projects, the difficult clients, the misfit teams, and I made them work. Not because I was a martyr, but because I saw what they could become. Julian didn't understand that. He saw people as pieces, movable, replaceable. To him, strategy was a game of detachment. Keep things lean, keep people guessing, hold information like currency. What he never learned was that power built on fear is short-lived. People comply, but they never commit. I still remember the day he first undermined me in public. It was a small thing, contradicting a hiring decision I'd already cleared. He did it in front of the team, smiling like it was a joke. I laughed along, of course. What else could I do? But something cracked in that moment, not just in my authority, in the unspoken agreement we all had, that respect was mutual, that roles meant something. That was the first time I felt the floor shift. There were others, too many to count now, moments I pushed down, dismissed as misunderstandings or growing pains, moments I should have seen for what they were, the start of a pattern. And yet, I stayed. Not because I lacked options, but because I wasn't ready to let go of what I'd built. Maybe that was naive. Maybe it was brave. Or maybe it was something else entirely, something women don't get credit for, restraint. The kind of strength that waits, that watches, that endures not out of weakness, but out of strategy. That's what I tell the women I mentor now. That silence isn't submission, it's a decision. But only if it's paired with intent, with observation, with preparation. Otherwise, it just becomes a void that others fill with their own narratives. That's what Julian did. He filled the silence I left with his own version of the story, that I was outdated, resistant to change, too cautious, not visionary enough. It spread like fog, hard to pin down, but suffocating all the same. But here's the thing about fog. All it takes is light. The audit was that light, not emotional, not confrontational, just facts, traced actions, patterns exposed. And once they were visible, the illusion collapsed. His version of events couldn't survive daylight. When I speak to new executives now, I don't tell them how to lead. I tell them how to listen, and not just to what's said in meetings, but to what's left unsaid. Who stops contributing? Who starts hesitating? Who avoids eye contact when decisions are made? That's where the real story lives. The company is still healing. Some scars never fade. But scars aren't signs of weakness. They're proof of survival. And survival, when chosen deliberately, becomes a kind of wisdom. I carry that wisdom now, not as a weapon, as a compass. It points forward, always. The word most often used now is transparency. It's on the posters in the break room, the banners in our onboarding decks. But for me, it's never been about slogans. It's about breath, the way people breathe differently when they're not afraid. You can hear it in meetings now. No more stifled sighs or subtle throat clears before someone dares to disagree. Just honest conversation. Messy sometimes, but real. That's how you know you're doing it right. Not by how smooth things run, but by how much space you leave for tension. Controlled, safe tension, the kind that produces truth. The irony is, we don't talk about Julian much anymore. Newer employees don't know the full story. They hear pieces, of course, something about a leadership shakeup, a change in direction. I've never corrected them. The details don't matter unless the lesson is remembered. And that's my job now, to make sure the lesson outlives the man. There was a moment, not long ago, when I found myself alone in the boardroom. I had just finished a call with our partners in Munich, the kind of call that used to be laced with nerves and defensive scripts. This time, it was easy, collaborative, equal. I stayed after the call ended, just sat there, the hum of the screensaver flickering on the wall. It was the same room where Edward had handed Julian the keys, where I had once presented market forecasts with the kind of quiet hope that only someone who still believes in meritocracy could muster. It felt different now, not because the room had changed, but because I had. Sometimes I wonder if Julian ever looks back. If he remembers what it felt like to sit in that chair thinking he'd won, maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. It doesn't matter. The story no longer belongs to him. I still get emails from former colleagues who left before the collapse. Some I surprised I stayed. Others say they always knew I'd come out on top. I don't reply to those ones, because this was never about winning. It was about restoring, about pulling something broken back into alignment, even if it left me with pieces I'll never fully put down. There's a kind of solitude that comes with leadership. The higher you go, the fewer people you can speak to plainly. That used to scare me. Now it steadies me. Silence, when chosen, is not emptiness. It's control. And control, real control, looks nothing like dominance. It looks like preparation. It looks like calm. It looks like someone who doesn't need to remind you who they are, because the work already did. This company doesn't belong to me. Not really. It belongs to everyone who believes in building things the slow, hard, honest way. The kind of way that doesn't make headlines. The kind of way that survives betrayals. When we finally published the internal memo outlining the company's new values, I made sure of one thing, that every value was tied to a verb, not an idea, not a sentiment, but an action. Not integrity, but own mistakes. Not transparency, but speak even when it's hard. Not respect, but listen without waiting to talk. Because values only matter when they're lived. Otherwise, they're just decoration. The company began to shift not when we changed policies, but when people started believing the rules applied to everyone, including the person at the top, especially the person at the top. That's what I model now. I don't ask for trust. I earn it again and again in small ways. I let my team challenge me. I correct my course publicly when I'm wrong. I reward the whisper that says, I'm not sure, just as much as the voice that says, I have a plan. And the results? They're not flashy. They're quiet. Retention is up. Engagement is steady. But more than that, the company finally feels human again. Not perfect, but honest. That's the legacy I want. Not revenge, not titles, but an organization that breathes easily because it no longer lives in fear. Some days I wonder what would have happened if I'd left, if I'd taken the severance, rewritten my resume, and disappeared into another firm, another title, another hollow promise. It would have been easier in many ways, cleaner, no confrontation, no waiting, just distance. But distance doesn't always mean healing. Sometimes it's just escape dressed up as progress. And I've never been interested in escape. What I wanted was to reclaim the thing I helped build, not just the company, but the belief behind it. The belief that work, when done with purpose, can be more than survival. It can be a form of expression, a kind of silent architecture, invisible but foundational. That belief had been poisoned, and it would have stayed that way if I hadn't returned. Not because I was irreplaceable, but because the rot was familiar to me. I had lived it. I knew how to trace it, name it, excise it without destroying the entire structure. Julian had brought in consultants, dozens of them, people who made beautiful decks filled with empty words, but none of them stayed long. They could diagnose problems, sure, but they couldn't feel them. They didn't understand what it meant to lose faith in your leadership, to keep showing up even when the place that once felt like home now felt like an ambush. I did. So when I came back, I didn't promise to fix everything. I promised to pay attention. And that's what I did. I met with teams at every level, not just VPs, not just high performers, everyone. I asked what had changed, what had hurt, what they missed, what they feared. And I listened. Some of what I heard made me furious, not at Julian, at myself, at how blind I'd been in those final months, how many signals I'd ignored, how many people I'd asked to just hang in there because I thought things would self-correct. They never do, not without intervention. So I became the intervention. Not loudly, not all at once, but methodically. I reviewed every policy, every workflow, every reporting structure. I looked for bottlenecks, power hoarding, ambiguity, and I erased them. slowly, carefully. The new systems we implemented weren't revolutionary. They were human, simple, clear lines of authority, anonymous feedback that actually got read and acted on, performance reviews that included self-reflection and upward feedback, promotion criteria based not just on results, but on how those results were achieved. Because results achieved through fear or manipulation aren't sustainable. They're accidents waiting to be exposed. Julian proved that. And if there's one thing I learned from him, it's that erosion doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's just the steady drip of dismissal. The way someone's idea is attributed to someone else. The way credit sticks to the same few names, while others fade. The way people stop correcting mistakes because it no longer feels safe to notice them. So I made it safe again. The shift wasn't immediate. People tested it, gently at first. A suggestion here, a question there. Then, slowly, more boldness, more initiative. People stopped asking for permission and started asking for feedback. We started hearing laughter in the office again. Not forced, not performative, just genuine, unguarded sound. It was small, but it meant everything. I stopped locking my office door. That's what real recovery looks like. Not declarations, not reinventions, just quiet consistency, day after day, policy after conversation. I don't know if the company will remember me in 10 years. Probably not. And that's fine, because the work I did wasn't about legacy. It was about preservation, about protecting something good from becoming something cruel. And if I did that, if even one person here feels seen, feels safe, feels like they matter, then everything I endured was worth it. Every dismissal, every whisper, every door that closed too fast behind me, it was all worth it. There's a quiet moment I return to often. It was late, long after the office had emptied. I was standing by the window in the break room, looking down at the streetlights. The city moved like it always does, constant, indifferent. Behind me, the building hummed, the air vents sighed. Someone had left a half-full coffee cup on the counter, steam long gone. Everything felt still, and yet alive. I wasn't thinking about the deal we just closed, or the quarterly reports waiting on my desk. I wasn't thinking about Julian. I was thinking about the way the light reflected off the floor tiles, the way my reflection looked softer than it used to. Not older, not harder, just settled. There's a strange intimacy in surviving something no one else fully witnessed. The emails, the erasures, the way rooms would fall silent when you entered. None of it dramatic enough to explain, but enough to erode. And when you survive that, when you come back from it, you carry a kind of clarity that can't be taught. It's why I no longer chase approval. I no longer explain my decisions to people who weren't in the room when it mattered. I lead, I listen, I adjust. And if I'm wrong, I say so. Out loud, no caveats. That alone sets a tone more powerful than any speech I could ever give. Edward called me a few weeks ago, just to check in. He sounded smaller. Not weak, just quieter. Retired life had slowed him down, and he admitted he didn't miss the boardroom. But he missed the people, missed the purpose. I understood that. Some of us are wired to build, others to hold. I had done both, and somehow I was still standing. He asked if I ever saw Julian. I told him no. There was a pause. Then he said, "He never understood what you protected." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because that's the thing. Julian thought he was fighting me, competing with me, but I was never his opponent. He was fighting the architecture, the bones of something much older and stronger than either of us. And that's why he lost. Not because he was evil, but because he was shallow. He underestimated the depth of what he was trying to control. And I never did. I knew what this place meant, not just to me, but to the people who made it breathe. The receptionist who remembered everyone's name. The engineer who worked in silence but always delivered. The admin who caught the budget mistake before it spiraled. Those people were the company. and they deserved better than silence. They still do. So I show up, I ask questions, I walk the halls, I remember birthdays, not because it's good optics, because it's good stewardship. You can't rebuild trust from a corner office. You do it one conversation at a time. I don't tell people how dark things got. I don't warn them about betrayal or sabotage. That's not the story they need. What they need to know is that strength can look like quiet persistence, that power can feel like grace, that revenge doesn't always come with fire, it sometimes comes with healing. And healing, when done right, leaves no need for vengeance. I don't need Julian to fail. He already did. I don't need an apology. The silence was louder, and I don't need to prove anything anymore. The proof is in the culture, in the numbers, in the hallway laughter that returned after years of absence. Sometimes I look at the young women in the office, sharp, driven, just beginning to understand their value, and I feel something like pride. Not because they remind me of myself, but because they won't have to become me. Not exactly. They'll carve their own paths, with fewer traps, more allies, and stronger foundations. That, in the end, is the only real legacy that matters. I was leaving the office late again, coat over my arm, elevator humming its low mechanical sigh as I waited, when I saw the envelope. Slipped under my door, no markings, just cream paper with a sharp crease. I opened it without hesitation. Inside, a note, no signature, just 4 words, printed in a familiar font. You were always right. I didn't react, not outwardly, just tucked it into my bag and walked out into the cold. The night was crisp, stars clear. There was no return address, no clue, but I didn't need one. Julian. It was his style, detached, polished, still holding control even as he surrendered to truth. No apology, no warmth, just an admission, buried, belated, but real. I didn't frame it. I didn't tell anyone. I placed it in a drawer at home beneath old keys and expired IDs. It didn't matter what he meant by it. The words weren't a gift. They were a weight shifted from his conscience to mine, and I let them sit there, unopened, unseen, uncelebrated, because closure doesn't always look like justice. Sometimes it's just the absence of noise. And yet, there was something in that silence, a space where resentment had once lived. I didn't forgive him. I didn't hate him. I simply released him. Let him float into that part of memory where old colleagues live, names you remember, voices you forget. The company moved on too, faster than expected. The systems we put in place started paying dividends. Employee turnover dropped. Our Paris office became one of the highest performing teams globally, and not because of aggressive targets, but because people felt safe, creative, empowered. I was invited to speak at a leadership summit, something I would have declined in the past, but this time I said yes, not for the exposure, for the message. I stood in a room of peers, lights dimmed, and told the story, not the scandal, not the audit, not the fallout, but the shift. The quiet, grueling, essential shift from fear to trust, from ego to clarity, from survival to stewardship. Afterward, a woman approached me, mid-30s, sharp eyes. She said, "That part about leading without needing applause, it stayed with me." I nodded. "It's the only way I know how." She looked relieved, not inspired, relieved, as if she'd just been granted permission to stop performing strength and start living it. That's the part no one tells you. Power, when real, is silent. It doesn't announce. It doesn't threaten. It simply exists, like gravity. And people feel it. They move differently around it, not because they fear falling, but because they know the ground won't disappear beneath them. I still have hard days, doubts, quiet moments where I wonder if I've become too cautious, too guarded. The scars are still there. They inform me, temper me, but they don't steer me. Because I no longer lead from fear. I lead from knowing. Knowing what betrayal looks like, what survival costs, what rebuilding demands, and what it gives back if you stay long enough, quiet enough, steady enough to see it through. The hallway lights still flicker when the HVAC turns on. Some things never change. But the feeling in those halls, that's new, that's earned, and no one can take that away from me. Not again. Now, when I walk through those halls, I don't look over my shoulder. I don't brace for the whisper that never comes. The silence I once feared has become something else entirely, space. A quiet where clarity lives, a stillness where strength hums beneath the surface. There's a rhythm to this place now. Meetings start on time. Projects move without chaos. People speak up, even when they're nervous, especially when they're nervous. That's how I know we're doing it right. Courage doesn't bloom in comfort. It blooms in trust. And trust doesn't come from policies. It comes from people. One of our analysts, a young man barely 2 years out of school, pulled me aside after a strategy review. Said he appreciated how I'd handled a disagreement with one of the VPs. "You didn't win the argument," he said. "You invited it." I smiled, not because it was praise, but because it meant he saw what I hoped others did, that power doesn't need to be proven, it just needs to be honest. That's what Julian never understood. He thought strength was about silencing doubt, about controlling the message. But I've learned that real power invites the uncomfortable. It lets people ask why. It makes room for dissent, not as threat, but as fuel. Because you can't lead if you're afraid of your team's voice, and you can't build anything lasting on fear. That's why the changes I made weren't just structural. They were cultural. No more rewards for silence, no more promotions based on proximity, no more pretending the emperor had clothes just because it was easier than naming the truth. It's slower this way, messier, but it's real, and real things take time. Sometimes I think about the woman I used to be, the one who stayed late to fix things quietly, who smoothed over Julian's rough decisions, who believed that loyalty would protect her. She wasn't wrong to hope, but she was wrong to stay silent. I don't blame her. She did what she thought was necessary. But if I could go back, I'd tell her to stop waiting for permission, to stop believing she had to earn what she'd already built, to stop mistaking endurance for strategy. Because silence without purpose is surrender. But silence when chosen, when wielded, is power. It's what carried me through the dismissal, through the betrayal, through the return. And now, it's what keeps me centered. I don't speak in every meeting. I don't weigh in on every decision. I don't need to. Because leadership at its best isn't loud. It's present, steady, unflinching. It listens more than it speaks. It sees what others overlook. It waits, not out of passivity, but precision. That's the kind of leader I've become. Not the kind who commands attention. The kind who builds something so solid, so quietly powerful, that others stand a little taller just being part of it. That's the legacy I'm leaving behind. Not in titles, not in press clippings, but in people. People who trust their instincts, who protect each other, who speak even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. That's how you know something's healed, not when it's shiny again, but when it's stronger at the break. And this place, this company, it's stronger. So am I. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of something you buried, or someone you chose not to become, then stay. Subscribe. Not for noise, not for drama, but for the quiet kind of power, the kind you only hear when everything else goes silent. Thank you all for listening to my story until the very end. I hope that, even just a little, what I've shared can bring something meaningful to you. Goodbye, and see you again.